All right, we're starting. Karla, welcome to ZenOne Podcast.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Karla. I wanted to talk to you for a long time. There are many reasons. I feel like you are the queen of DSR procurement. I always want to learn. As you know, on this podcast, we talk about the strategies for private practices. So we're going to twist the angle and see what private practice can learn. So I really hope that people that are in charge of purchasing and buying and things like that will tune in to try to listen from you. And also, your current job is SupplyDoc Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships. So I got a lot of questions. And I want to start. What is the GPO?
Yeah. So a GPO is a group purchasing organization that focuses on basically negotiating contracts specific to an industry or multiple industries. And they mainly focus on supplies and services. So, they're based on a membership status. So what they do is, they put out like their promotion, their contracts, and basically try to attract members. And that's kind of how they build their structure. But yeah, GPOs are very big in the space right now, and there's like a lot of them, multiple of them, in the dental industry, and definitely a good structure to follow.
So if I'm a Dr. Smith in the middle of Texas, why do I need a GPO?
So I mean, like I said, there's a lot of different GPOs, and then there's a lot of structures. You have your horizontal GPOs, which is more like, they cross industries, so they can offer products that, can meet any type of industry. Or, you have your vertical GPOs that are more focused on a specific industry and specific products. The ones that we see in dental are mainly vertical GPOs. They're very focused on the dental industry, and the supplies and contracts that they have are vendors specific to that, and services and SaaS products specific to the dental industry. If you're especially, one of the main benefits of joining a GPO is that when a GPO create their contracts and they negotiate the contracts, they're using as leverage the total volume of a spend. Instead of, if you are independent practices, and you're only spending, 150, $200,000, then you join a GPO, and then that GPO already has like 100 members. So now they're negotiating those contracts on a larger amount. And then instead of negotiating based on 200,000, they're negotiating based on like, 5 million, 6 million, 10 million, right? So it does provide economies of scale, when the GPO is wanting to negotiate those contracts. So if you're an independent doctor, independent practice, it will be very beneficial because to join a GPO, because the pricing that you may not be able to get as an independent practitioner, you might be able to get it, at a better, get savings and access to even better terms by, joining the contracts of the GPO.
Are all the GPOs the same?
They are not. People think that, they are very similar in structure, but every GPO, like any other company, has a value proposition, right? So some of them provide, access to learning and platforms. Some of them provide access to see for doctors. Some of them, just focus on DSOs and special markets, or others, just focus on independent practices. So they all have their own value proposition. So they're definitely not all the same. And the way that they operate internally, even though there might be things that are similar in nature when it comes to, account managers and how to negotiate contracts, still the way that they go about approaching the members and, things like that, they're definitely different. Especially also like memberships are different, from each GPO. Some GPOs don't charge a membership, and what they charge is like what they call admin fees, which is based on whatever volume you spend on the contracts that you sign with them. So that's kind of like how they get their revenue. So definitely all of them are different in some way.
Yeah. So, Karla, you don't have a dog in the game. Okay. Can we pick like a couple of those GPOs and just run through examples without like really picking the favorites, just so people understand? Like, are you comfortable doing it?
Yeah, I think we can talk about a couple of them. Yeah.
Okay, just pick whatever you think, like the common GPOs that we hear now in dentistry, and then let's run through their differences.
Mhm. Yeah. Non-disclaimer, I don't want to get like comments on it. But let's say when I was at Oak Point, we were members of Severdent. So Severdent is a GPO that kind of branched out from affordable care, and they focus a lot on DSO market. We, as a members, there was no membership fee. There was some component of admin fees, but they focus a lot on, bigger, mid-market to elite DSOs. They were, they had an advisory council. They were always looking into feedback from their members to what other contracts might be of interest. They did data analysis. So, very structured. And I still remember when they started, I think it was back in like 2017 or something, maybe. No, 2018, something like that. But anyway,
It
very
was
structured. Yeah, something.
before COVID.
Very structured. They have thousands of members, and same thing, like the contracts that they had a great team of people that negotiated those contracts. So overall, really good experience. And actually, with Severin, I work with them in multiple roles. When I worked at the dental school, UNC Dental School, we were members. Dental school was members of Severin. Then, I kind of worked for a dental nonprofit in Durham. We became members. And then with Oak Point, when I joined, they had just signed with them. So definitely work with them in different roles. So that's one of them. Synergy is another one that gets a lot of traction. I think they're focused on like independent practices and then helping them achieve those like pricings that larger groups might be able to obtain. I think, they also focus a lot, obviously, on supplies, but they focus on like, those specific services and products that are needed, for an efficient operational. There's another one, DDS United. That's another one. I think honestly, I don't right now with the ones that I've worked, I don't think I have anything bad to say. I think this just structure is just different from.
Well, yeah, we wouldn't talk bad on this podcast.
Right.
Not at all.
So I think it's like I mentioned, like every one of them have like their own value proposition, right? So
Right.
some of them, I know, I work with one that is kind of like starting. It's called Fireside, and its only main focus is going to be pediatric dentist, and it's focusing on Southeast independent practices. So that one again, and then one of the value propositions is that once they join they pay the membership, they join the GPO, they immediately get access to a procurement platform. And that way they can kind of centralize their purchasing, and that just comes as a benefit through the platform. And then very focused on that pediatric dentistry, market. So I think that's yet another one that I foresee is going to have a lot of growth. And, Smile Source, I think Source Club, there's definitely a couple of them. And I believe Source Club focuses on, I'm not sure if they have a membership, but they focus on like, getting those savings to the DSOs and definitely like, pre-negotiated contracts, same thing. And then try to basically, once the member comes in, run a data analysis, pricing comparison, and then providing what's best.
Okay. So we went through a couple names. And if I'm, again, Dr. Smith out in Texas, general dentist, I'm not a pediatric dentist. Otherwise, kind of makes sense, Fireside. But I'm looking for, first of all, I'm still confused. Why do I need one? So let's just say I have a really good relationship with a Shine rep or a Patterson rep or name your favorite vendor. Why would I work with the GPO?
Yeah, I think
and on top of it, sorry to interrupt you, would I lose any of my current products?
no. So those are great questions. So first of all, addressing that, why would I join? One of the biggest reasons why they join is, well, two main reasons. One is that they're seeking cost savings, right? They're seeking lower price, and they have already tried to get lower price just by doing direct negotiations with their own supplier. Or and then they're like, okay, well, now we need to look for their suppliers telling them, well, you need now to maybe spend X more, have growth of 20% or whatever percent, right, to gain another tier of savings or get this percentage of savings. So so a lot of them, one of the main reasons is like, okay, well, I know I'm not going to be able to achieve that as an individual or independent practice by joining a GPO. Basically, I'm taking advantage of the aggregated spend so that I can leverage a better pricing that I would typically not get as an independent practice. And then the second piece is, what's the second question?
God, am I going to lose any products?
Right.
Because I'm sitting and thinking about vocal composite. If I'm a big fan of vocal composite, I don't think there's any GPO that carries that.
Well, you can, if I'm correct, like for example, vocal, you can get through distribution, some of them, or you can get
only two
direct, right?
Unless it's a
only
gray
two
market.
distributors or something. I think it is, right? They're very limited. But for example, what they try to do, I don't think it's based on the GPO. I think it's based on the supplier that they're partnering with, right? So some GPOs have prime vendor agreements with main distributors, right? Or some have agreements with more regional dealers, and some of them only, because they have prime vendor agreements, only have one distributor that they're going to work with, and some of them have multiple, right? So when they run the formulary, one of the first things that whoever it's gonna, and this happens whether it's a GPO or you're just working on your own, right? You're one of the first things that, and you know this, you're going to analyze is which products that you offer are an exact match to the products that I'm already using. And then, and another responsibility is, and this is like the supplier, the GPO look at it as the liaison of providing that contract to that member. But the account itself, which is the contract itself, whoever manages that contract is still going to be performing the savings and working directly with the customer. So their responsibility is, okay, we're going to run a pricing analysis. It says here that as a distributor, we're going to be able to provide you exact match for X percentage of your products, but then let's say 80%, but then 20% of your products we do not, that you're currently using, we do not offer, but their responsibility is to provide you an alternative product. So they can do that and say, we do not offer these ones specific, but we do have alternative products that, you know, you can look into or test or so forth. And that obviously goes back to the decision of the customer, whether they want to do that or, and sometimes some of them also might join the contract. They might already, let's say somebody's already working with Patterson, right? And then the GPO has, I'm going to use SupplyDoc as an example. The GPO has contract with SupplyDoc. So once Patterson, they get that purchase history from Patterson, SupplyDoc is going to compare it. And then you're going to say, SupplyDoc's response is 80% of your products are exact match. We have them all. 20% we don't, but we're offering you this instead. Then they can say, well, you know what? Your pricing is a lot better. I'm going to give you 80% of my business. And then that 20% that I don't want to change, I'm going to keep with Patterson because they do offer the product. So it kind of goes back to like what you're willing to negotiate and compromise on. Another thing I was going to say, going back to like why choose a GPO, a lot of people choose GPOs because the GPO is the one responsible to negotiate the contract. So if you're an independent practice, you probably don't have a procurement person specifically. You may have a dental assistant or a dental hygienist or the office manager making the purchases at the practice level, right? Then it's up to either the office manager or the doctor to negotiate those contracts. So
Usually
when
dental assistant.
yeah, so you know, it could be any of them, right? And then you're
They're
taking
clicking away through the websites.
right. So then you're taking away like that clinical time to actually be doing something that is more operational of nature, right? So GPOs, because they already have these contracts pre-negotiated when you join, you basically say, you know what? I think we are going to benefit from that contract. You know, I want to activate this contract on my account. And then the GPO connects the supplier, the vendor of that contract with the practice and just runs with it, right? So the practice itself or DSO doesn't have to do really anything when it comes to an RFP or anything related to negotiating that contract. So to me, that's a huge benefit, especially if you don't have a procurement team or a robust procurement team, because RFPs takes time.
Yeah, I think the problem is, like it's interesting that a lot of people that I interview are primarily working with DSOs,
Mm-hmm.
and we're so comfortable with terms like procurement,
Mm-hmm.
RFPs, and this and that. And then I think I visited 360 dental practices now. Like visit, not meaning just drove by them, right? But like I was inside and talking.
Yeah. Even in the DSO space, the procurement word is kind of like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
People.
You're talking to a dental assistant, right?
Right.
Who is in charge of an ordering with a credit card and she doesn't have a budget. And that's your 80% of the offices in the country.
Correct. A lot of people relate to the term purchasing, right? They're purchasing clinical items, and that's what people relate to. What I always explain, and I think it's becoming more traction and a better understanding in the DSO space of procurement, is that procurement, like purchasing, is one of the functions within procurement, right? So procurement can be, relationship building, contract negotiations, risk analysis, purchasing, so it's the whole picture, right? So when you're talking to an independent practice, honestly, some of them are like, I don't care about this whole thing. I care about the purchasing, and I want to make sure that I'm getting the
best
products that I
price.
want, clinically that I want, and then I get the best price, right? And that's it. So I think, I honestly think some GPOs, like I said, focus on the independent practices, but some of them tailor their contracts to, like, let's say if you're moving from an emerging group to like a mid-market group, right? So I think it all depends on I always tell the practice, like I met with somebody yesterday and they were asking me about, a couple of these questions, procurement and so forth. They only have one practice. And they're opening a second one, right? So I always like understanding what are their growth goals to kind of better assist people in advising them like, okay, well, you may be able to benefit from a GPO, right? You may be able to do a partnership, or you know what, I think you're at the, kind of like at the volume that you can negotiate contracts by yourself. If you have the people, in house to do those RFPs, to negotiate those contracts, you might get better leverage by doing it by
Yeah.
yourself. So,
Yeah.
it's just kind of like a balancing decision.
Earlier, you said that some GPOs have a single contract and some have multiple with the vendors. Do you see any pluses or minuses, pros or cons?
Yes, pros, I would say when somebody negotiates a prime vendor agreement, it's most likely that their pricing is going to be more aggressive because basically you're offering all your members the same contract, right? And then only one option. So basically they're being more aggressive in their pricing with the assumption that they're always going to get the business if they activate that contract because it's the only option. So they some of the times they're more aggressive. And as in a good way, better pricing. Not always, but sometimes. But then some cons that I see is like, and then having two distributors, I think it's a pro in the sense of like, you might be splitting the business when it comes to memberships, but it does give an alternative option to the, to the members. And it also provides for like a little bit of a competitive market to gain, incentivize them to get the entire business and not just a portion of it. Right. So I think that, it's always helpful. From a con perspective, again, going back, now you're splitting the business, so forth. And then GPOs are not like DSOs. Like a DSO can tell you, you know what, the decision has been made at the, leadership level. Everybody's going to buy from Patterson. Everybody's going to buy from SupplyDoc. Everybody's going to buy, right? So GPOs don't have that, like at least the ones that are maybe not direct, like, tied to a DSO. They don't have the authority to say, hey, you're only going to use this contract. No, they're going to provide you the option. And then let's say somebody's using, SupplyDoc, and then the GPO that they join doesn't have SupplyDoc as an option and only has I don't know, like Patterson or whatever, right? So then now you have a loyal relationship that you want to sustain, but then you may want to like leverage the savings, but you don't have, it's one or the other. So you're having to make the decision as to like, do I move away completely? Which a lot of DSOs now are actually taking that into account. Like before, I saw a lot of like, there's like that loyalty and like not wanting to change. But a lot of the DSOs, because the market and the margins have been like shrinking so much that they're trying to get bigger savings. So they're willing to, if the savings are there and are worth it, they're willing to change and move that relationship.
And maybe before we move to, like, I do have a question about adoption, but before we go there, is there anything that you see that can go wrong with a GPO? Like, let's say you convinced me, I'm Dr. Smith out of Texas. I signed up. Pick your favorite. What can go wrong?
I think mainly it will probably be from a customer service perspective. Adoption, they may not have the best workflows to help with adoption. Their contracts might not be the best negotiated contracts. So you end up like not using any of them, and they may not apply, which is why the member itself, before they go in, they have to really look into like, okay, what's your offering, right? So they don't get the value if they join, especially the ones that are paying for memberships. And then you're paying like a monthly membership or annually, however it is structured, and you're not using any of the contracts or not receiving the savings that you were expecting to see. So I think from an overall picture, I think that will be something that could, go wrong. And then, going back to the customer service from the GPO, that they're not really, communicative. They're not, they don't provide good customer service, and the contracts that they have in place and the points of contacts that they have for those contracts are not responsive or not like the best account managers. So that has a big impact when it comes to, and to me, GPOs really have to have good reporting, because what happens now is a lot of them request the data from the members, and it's a manual process. So that puts a lot of weight and responsibility on the member when in in essence, you're supposed to be making their life better, right? Instead of like, can you send me X amount of invoices? Can you send me this? Can you send me that? Well, try to create tools that can make that input of data like a lot easier and not put in that way. So when the member feels like they're just adding another layer of work,
Forget it.
yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. What's interesting is you mentioned some of the GPOs. I was looking into GPOs that are provided by educational centers like Spear, COIS, and I was so disappointed because you go on the website, and I was doing it. I was helping one of our customers. You go on a website, they list 4 or 5 vendors, and they list 5, 6 contacts. So like sometimes it's a 1 contact, 2 contacts per vendor that should manage that relationship. And you call them, and it's A, the person is not there anymore, or B, they have no clue what's going on. So you literally like pick your favorite company, and it's listed there. Let's just say they sell burrs at a 50% discount for that particular educational group, and they have no clue. And so then my question is usually, or typically the question that I get is when people sign up, they're saying, we're members of X GPO. How is it reflected on Zen? My question to them is, how is it reflected on your website login? Right? So like, how does the vendor that you work with, that your customer of, knows that you're also the member of a certain buying group? Why is there such a disconnect?
Right. It's funny because again, it goes back to what I mentioned about that customer service. Like, and you're right. Like, there's a lot of movement in this industry. And so somebody that's working this company like now works in another, and so there's definitely a lot of turnaround and turnover when it comes to the industry. And I like when the member says, I wanna activate this contract, and the GPO, customer representative, account manager, whatever, like from the GPO makes that direct introduction to the account manager for that contract. And the reason why is because they're supposed to have the latest person and the most recent, the most relevant, let's put it this way, person to work with them, right? That they typically have one point of contact, that they're the ones, okay, you're going to handle all the accounts that are going to come in from our GPO, right? So they make that direct introduction. Sometimes there are times that they don't respond, right? So that you're not getting response, you're not getting follow-up. So to me, it's the responsibility of the GPO, because they own the contract. To me, it's the responsibility of the GPO to follow up with the vendor and make sure that they're compliant to their contract terms, not only from contractually from, like terms and conditions and so forth, but the customer service part of it. So to me, that's a responsibility of the GPO if something like that happens. But I like when they publish, because it attracts members. A lot of GPOs have portals where you can activate the contract and so forth. But some of them, let's say you click activate and it goes a notification to the GPO to say, hey, this member wants to activate, and then you make the introduction. I really like direct introductions instead of having the member just, yes, like anything else. And it doesn't happen just GPOs, like it can happen with DSOs, with whoever. Sometimes they're like, what are you talking about? So to me, it's the responsibility of the GPO to make sure the introduction is done. Can you please activate new pricing for this account and make sure that the account is in place? That way, and sometimes I would have GPOs to tell me like, okay, or even me as a customer, I would say, I want the pricing to be activated on the 5th of this month or on the 15th, right? And then they would say, okay, pricing is going to be activated starting X date. But that, to me, that's part of the responsibility of the GPO, account manager, and the member, right? That communication between the three, because again, GPO to me is the liaison between the two.
Okay. Maybe without naming the names, is anybody doing it the right way?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of them, are
But like
doing it.
truly
Yeah.
that you can say like,
Well,
this one is doing it. Like, is there one?
yeah. Well, I mean, I can tell you from my experience that Severidan did it that way. And I would hold responsible Severidan if I didn't get response from a vendor that I
Right.
partnered with.
But
So
they're only for DSOs. Like if we're talking about private offices,
yeah, but
they
I
won't
think a
work with
lot of,
private offices.
yeah, I mean, I don't know the structure or the workflows of many of them internally, but I'm going to say that a lot of them are working towards that. And I would suggest for the ones that are not to really just work on implementing a
We won't
workflow like
name them.
that. Yeah.
All right, cool. So then let's talk about adoption. Why is it so hard for GPOs to get the adoption?
I was going to say like anything else, like adoption in general, it's like it's a challenge. For let's you're talking about, like a member joins and then the adoption of them. Yeah. Um I think it goes back to some of the challenges that I mentioned about like data gathering. Whether it's an independent practice or a DSO, don't want to do the work and don't want to be asking accounting for invoices, don't want to be asking, if they're using a procurement platform or a supplier, they don't want to be asking for like, hey, can you send me this or that? So it's that added extra layer. I think it's kind of like it's a challenge for adoption, because people are like, okay, I'm joining something, so I don't have to do the work, right? Like you do the work. So I think that's always also because when you're working with a GPO, like you want to have one point of contact at the practice or at the DSO, whether it's leadership headquarters, whatever, just that one point of contact, right? So now you're assigning somebody to take accountability of that relationship, right? You're meeting with them monthly, whether it's the doctor or whoever, right? So you're meeting with them monthly, or you're following up with reports, or you're trying to gather the data. So now it's like you not only are adding, that workflow, you're also adding a person that has to be in charge of that relationship. It's the only way that it's going to work. If you don't have somebody in charge of the relationship, then you're going to miss out, right? So I think, again, it goes back to like how much you're willing to invest in the relationship to get that hour. And then, because anything else, and unless it's a contract that they're really not interested in, then, adoption should be pretty easy.
You talk about the contract and interested, like a GPO with a vendor or GPO with a
Yeah,
customer?
GPO with a vendor. So for example, like I always say that when you're evaluating GPOs, you want to know which companies they partner with. So
Yeah. And while you're actually grabbing a water, what's interesting is even on that level, it's not enough information. So if somebody's evaluating a GPO, let's just say 2 GPOs will carry Ultradent. It doesn't mean the price is going to be the same.
correct.
And so I think it's also worthwhile having 5, 6 items sent to the GPO to the comparison and see who has the better prices with a specific vendor. So like Brasler, everybody got Brasler if I'm not mistaken, or one of those companies. So like I think it's worthwhile making sure, because I feel like some GPOs will specialize in certain things and some GPOs will specialize on other things, right? So like just picking the right one is actually important.
Yeah, no, it's totally important, because when you're evaluating GPOs, if you're trying to join one, like obviously you're going to look at what's the cost, to join, like so forth. You want to ask, how many members do you have right now? What's your portfolio of contracts? Do you have, sometimes they can't speak specifically to the pricing if you're not in the contract, activated in the contract, but they can give you an average and say, hey, we average X amount of savings to our members with these contracts. And also when you're evaluating the portfolio, like you mentioned, it's like that GPO may not be offering contracts that you're interested in, right? Or they may be offering contracts that you already have a relationship that you don't want to change because you know that you're already getting the best price, right? So you really want to look into like, what are your growth goals? What are the things that you are focusing on? And then does this one, and the not only that, the growth goals of yourself and your capacity as a member, and like, do I have the time? How much time is it required? If I join your GPO, how much time are you requiring from me?
But they all gonna say it's quick and easy.
So
Don't worry, Doc. It's so fast.
So all of these things, and then also understanding, like, is it like, are you only doing independent practices? Are you doing also DSO space? Because obviously DSO, you're going to have a bigger leverage, and so forth. And then, again, how many members do you have? Just by knowing how many members, you're probably like, okay, well, this one has 10 and then this one has 100, right? So now you kind of deduct like, okay, well, the 100 one is supposed to have the better pricing because they have the bigger economies of scale. But,
Can I push back?
yeah.
Let's just say you get one that's 1,000 locations and one is 10,000 locations. One with 1,000 location might have all 1,000 use Ultradent. And the one with the 10,000 can have only 10 use with Ultradent. And that's where the price difference, where the 1,000 location GPO might have a better price with Ultradent. It's not a pushback. It's just a clarification on what
No,
you
it
earlier
is.
said, is like going deeper in the
Yeah,
numbers.
it is, because you can have all the contracts you want in a GPO, but if you're not driving utilization of the contracts, then again, you yourself are not driving. Let's say you do that contract, a 2-year contract. Okay, so maybe you negotiated that you're locking that price for 2 years for whoever joins. It doesn't matter the size, it doesn't matter whatever. Some of the contracts that the vendors, when they partner with GPOs, they have tiers. So they're like, if you spend this, then you get X amount of percentage. If you spend this, and then so forth, right? So the contracts are completely different. Some of them, like I mentioned, they can lock price. So you can say, well, okay, it doesn't matter the utilization. I'm always going to have this price, right? So yes, you're right. It depends on the utilization of the contract, because you can sign a contract and if they're not driving utilization, the vendor is going to say like, I can't give you a bigger discount because you're not giving me sales. I mean, there's no increase in sales and so forth. So yes, you're right. That's the overall of like, like I said, the assumption that because it's more members, you might be able to negotiate better. But one thing that I'm going to say is on the background too of the GPO is with these contract terms and pricing, it's also like who in the GPO is negotiating the contracts for you. If you have a strong team negotiating those contracts, if you have strong data, if you're like, you really have somebody that's like a bulldog and knows the space and really knows how to negotiate, sometimes some of them can get a lot better pricing just because of those relationships. So, so yes, it kind of depends. And you know this, I mean, it's all about relationships. It's about relationship,
I do.
reputation, right? And if I'm to be honest, like if I'm negotiating a contract, I'm gonna say like, I don't care that you gave this person that pricing, that like, I don't want that pricing. I want better.
Right.
So it all depends also who in your team of the GPO team is negotiating that contract.
That's so cool. That's such a good point. And I think there are, I don't want to say rumors, but there are basically people saying that all manufacturers by law are required to give the same prices and all that stuff. But I still believe the relationship play a key role. Like I just can't imagine that all distributors get the same price from the manufacturers. I just can't. I feel like there's something going on where somebody gets a better price because of the volume. I don't think it's all the same. And again, it's not driven by anything. It's just my gut feeling. I don't want anybody to think that we're looking into something that's not there. It's totally gut feeling. But just knowing how this industry works, I feel like relationships trump everything.
They do. And I think, that's kind of how you learn the ins and outs, right? And you learn about the conversations and about, sometimes I know, I'm not going to name them, but I know manufacturers that say, no, I'm not going to partner with any GPO. But then they have a good relationship
Somehow,
with one that came up and
somehow it
it's
happened.
done.
Right.
So again, it goes back to whoever in the GPO team, it's building those relationships, it's understands the industry. You can have all the data analysis that you want, but you really need that relationship builder and that person that understands the intricacies of not only like the operations of a DSO, but also like the procurement side.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about this stuff, talked about the adoption. What can go wrong with GPOs? Why does the practice need? So a little bit of the how to pick. Actually, one question I have, is it possible that a GPO can get a better price than a DSO? Can you give an example?
It could okay. So when I worked at the mid market DSO, um,
How many locations?
I, 50,
Okay.
45 to 50 was mid market. And sometimes, they would run the analysis and I would think like, man, like this, I know we can do better, but I've already checked with the vendor and they're like, unless you increase sales on this end, like there's not going to be any better pricing. And then when I reach the GPO and they do the analysis, they can get me 15-20%, savings, right?
On the same product, not a
On the
different
same
brand,
product,
on same brand product.
same
Okay.
product, same product. They're just getting me a better pricing, right? And it happens a lot with equipment. So they focus on supplies, but especially in capital equipment, there's a lot of companies that really drive very competitive pricing when joining GPOs. So I could like go as a DSO and say, "Hey, can you give me this pricing?" And then like, I mean, again, I don't want to like, but I've known of equipment like CT scans and things like that through the GPO I've gotten like $20,000 less than I would like typically as a DSO because of my size, right? Because of what I negotiated. So that's one. And there can be occasions where you as a DSO negotiate better pricing than the GPO. So it can be either way, right? Sometimes I would say, well, you know what? I'm going to join that contract. I see the value, I see the pricing savings. Then they present to me, well, we just signed X contract, right? A SaaS product. And this is the offer. But I already had conversations with the SaaS product company and I know they're offering me a better price, right? Because I'm negotiating directly. So it can happen both ways.
I feel like somebody listening to this, especially if it's a doctor of a single location, driving home after like a long day, they're like,
I know. There's so many different things like in the back end. It's funny because I was talking again like to an independent doctor yesterday and I always ask, so how do you divide your supplies? How do you put them in the P&L? Like, are you categorizing differently? And just by having like, he was like making notes and he was like, okay. And I'm like, yeah, because people think procurement. Okay, it's dental supplies. There's so many different categories within it. And some GPOs have contracts with labs. So they may not be able as a DSO or as an independent practice get that pricing, but then with the GPO contract, they're able to have access to that lab. So
Interesting.
yeah, so there's definitely a lot. For example, like some GPOs focuses on like services. So nobody, I mean, no pun intended, or like, nothing against them, but like nobody wants to spend 3 months or a month or hours negotiating pricing with Airgas, if or shredded or whatever, like those kind of services that are very transactional. So then like the GPO already has a contract. They only have to connect me with the account manager, and boom, I got the pricing, the discount, done.
Interesting. So it feels like not only you have a relationship with vendors, but there are also GPOs that have a relationship with vendors. They have contracts. Nobody obviously is going to talk about the details of their individual contracts with vendors. Unfortunately, I think it would be a lot easier if that information would have been transparent, like throw a contract into ChatGPT and ask to summarize into one sentence. That would be phenomenal, right? So like percent this, and that, and then you can clearly see what GPO is actually better for you. But one of the things that I hear a lot is from the adoption standpoint. A doctor, again, I'll use my example, Dr. Smith in the middle of Texas. He or she would use one of the top 3 vendors or 4, like one regional. And then a GPO says, look, I can give you these prices. It's incredible. In some cases, it's an 80% savings. And then you see zero traction, like literally zero traction. Then you start communicating back and forth, and then you find out that the rep is there. The rep is in the office, right? So I guess I have 2 questions from you. From your personal experience, from your standpoint, what value do the reps bring? And the second one is, how much time do they have until they go extinct?
I think that reps do bring a lot of value just because it's a face to the partnership that you have, right? So I always say that a lot of people that are using a vendor for a long time, they're not necessarily loyal to the company, they're loyal to the rep.
Oh, yeah.
So
You can see it when reps switch from one company to another.
correct. And sometimes, I'm going to put it out there. One of the best opportunities to change a vendor is when the rep leaves, whether it's for another company or another, or retires or whatever, because you're getting change management anyway. So you might as well take the opportunity to explore, right? Because again, I feel like a lot of the loyalty it's to the rep and not necessarily to the company. Yes, the products there, but you can find products everywhere, like supplies. How many distributors or manufacturers are out there, right? So and selling most all the same brands or the same product. So I really believe it's like the loyalty is to the rep. So I do think that they're very important in the relationship. I have seen changes in the industry where that rep structure has been changing, and it's more like an account manager, kind of structure. But I'm a people person. I like having somebody to talk to. I like having somebody that, like, if I'm in the middle of like a procedure and I can't find something, or something breaks in my office, or a compressor went out, whatever, that I have somebody that I can immediately call and I know that they're going to come and help me. Right. So I think there's definitely a lot of value in that. And then some independent practices have the old like tradition of like having the rep order for them.
Yeah, I've seen those.
A lot, right? So, I remember when we did acquisitions, we had a lot of doctors that the rep just went in, check inventory, and he was the one placing the orders. Well,
It's horrible.
I'm sorry, but I immediately would take that out, because I'm like, now you're putting the inventory control to somebody that's not within your organization, right? So,
It's not their best interest to do the right thing.
well, yeah, and you don't want to make bad assumptions, but still, like, the control is in your organization, not on somebody else's, right? But yeah, but they will come in, and then they're the ones placing orders. They know when to come. They know, like, oh, you missed this. They're great at getting you promotions. They handle those, so they definitely have value. I sometimes, when I was a procurement director, I would ask them to maybe conversations that I didn't have time to have with the practices, or I would say, can you, like, this is what I need from all these locations that are your account. Can you go to the practice and do this for me? And they would do it. They would sit down, or saying like, I need them to reduce costs by X percentage. I need you to sit down with them and provide them a list of alternative products and see which ones of your, formulary can actually be switched to alternative products and get me X amount of savings. So I would use the rep for that. And then, because
Interesting.
they're more clinically driven, right? So they know, like, they would sit down with a doctor, dental assistant, whoever, and then say, hey, I know the products. These are some of the things. These are some alternatives. and so forth. So yes, I do think there's value, but I also have seen the change in the industry where they might be getting bigger accounts or bigger territory and not necessarily that much personalized
Interesting.
experience.
Okay. What is it something about GPOs that we missed and we didn't talk about that maybe we should have?
I think we cover most of it. Like I said, I think it really depends, like anything else, like what your growth goals are, what's your status quo, what are the things that you're interested in, and then really, I would like make a little scoreboard, like scorecard, and like say, oh, these are the ones that I'm looking at. How many of them pay membership? You have to pay membership fees. How many of them? Some of them take percentage of savings at the end of the year. They all have a different structure. Some of them, okay, these don't have like, do I have any penalties if I don't meet these volumes? Do how many members and which area that they focus on, right? So yeah, I think we cover most of it, but I still recommend the relationship. It's just picking and choosing the right one, and there's a couple of them in the industry right now, so I think and there's one for everybody.
Right. Okay. And so maybe the final question is what is the right first step? Like, actually, let me ask a different question. Obviously, when you open a practice or when your practice is growing, this is probably not the first priority, right? So, at what point of the life of the practice you would recommend someone to look for the GPO? Like maybe percentages or like collections amounts, or when the budget on supplies becomes X, right? So, what would be the tipping point for you to say, yep, you need to look at the GPO or extend or change the relationship when it comes to the purchasing?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because I think you could say that, for example, if you're looking at your spend percentage of supplies, as a comparison to top revenue, and say, I know I could be like, at 5% or 4.5 or whatever, but we're at 8. Like, why, right? What's going on? And I'm not getting better pricing from my existing suppliers, so I'm like, so I need to check for other avenues. And so I would say that's one. I also would say, again, going back to the team, internal team. So I would say if you're continuing to grow, I know of DSOs that are 100 locations and don't have procurement directors or don't have like somebody specific in procurement. So if you're going to roll that way, I would say like, man, like I need somebody to help me with the RFPs because I have no time or anybody to help me with that. Right. So it's kind of like, that's why I always go back to growth. Like, how are you positioning yourself? And what are the resources? Are you willing to bring them in house, or are you willing to, because you're basically outsourcing some sort of procurement, right, to them, because you're not taking that into yourself. So I would look at, and then also if you're wanting to grow in like de novos or more acquisitions, like with that you're growing your overhead, right? So you're growing your volume of spend as well. So now you may be at 2 million, but in like 2 years or 3 years, you may be at 5-6 million, right? So you're looking at, well, if I'm going to be here, I know I'm going to be able to have X amount of savings, but I want to take care of the savings now, right? Or I want to like recapitalize, I want to sell, and then maybe getting these contracts and then for a year and then getting, some of the savings immediately, then maybe I can, get some better margin. So I think honestly, it goes back to your internal team. It goes back to, like you mentioned, budget and your overhead, and it goes back to your growth goals.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's not a specific stage of the business. It's more of where you at personally, and where you at when it comes to your acumen of like business acumen of running the
Hmm.
practice. So more of a business leader when you look at the P&Ls. Yeah, probably like when you start looking at the P&Ls, that's the first sign that you're ready for a GPO, because just the fact that you're checking the P&L, which is a profit and loss statement once a month, is going to say that you actually care about the expenses.
Correct. And you're tracking them like regularly.
Right. That's awesome. We actually always talk about with our customers is a dollar saved is actually a dollar saved versus
Mhm.
a dollar earned is probably like 20 cents made in the pocket. So like it's pretty cool concept when you save money. So Carl, anything you want to add towards the end of the interview, like anything that comes to your mind when it comes to the GPOs or the DSOs or anything like that, or like maybe your own predictions?
No, I think one thing I was going to mention, when, if you're, whether it's an independent practice, a multi location, or an actual DSO, I think is really looking internally again to your growth goals and seeing like if you want, some people don't have growth goals. I had conversations with doctors that are like, I'm good with what I am. Like if I open another one, then I open it, but not really my plan. So, some people are just fine. But really looking into it because, like, for example, If people tell me, when is a good time to get a procurement director? And I always, it's again, I go back to like the structure, whatever, but I always say, well, if you're going from like emerging to mid market because you're trying to grow from like 10 practices to 20 or whatever, you're like transitioning. To me, that's the best time to get somebody in procurement, right? Whether it's a manager or whatever. And as you continue to grow, then the level of experience it's that needed is higher. So I say the same thing when you're looking into GPOs. It's like, where are you transitioning? Where's that wave going? Like, do you want to like continue to work as usual, or do you want to kind of like get in the wave and say, I can benefit a lot from this, right? And if I go from like 5 locations to 10 and I want to get there, then maybe this is something that I need. So I always, that emerging to mid-market transition, I always say like, that's your perfect chance, whether you hire somebody in-house or outsource it for a fractional, that's perfect time.
That's awesome. That's pretty cool. Where can people find you?
Yes. So Karla.s@SupplyDoc.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn.
You're
I'm
pretty
always,
active on LinkedIn.
you
You
know, I'm
share a
always,
lot of cool stuff on LinkedIn. So I'd highly
so I'm
recommend
always
people
up.
follow you.
Well, I'm always posting, so you can find me there. So, and then I'll be attending a couple of conferences, dental conferences this year. So I know I'm going to see a lot of people. So yes,
Fantastic.
Karla.s@supply.com.
Fantastic. Karla, thank you so much for the wisdom. I hope we're going to do another one because this subject of GPOs, I think it's just going to continue to accelerate. So I want to make sure we stay on top of it.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you.
Bye.